right, welcome Antoinette Meyer from SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments. We're so happy to have you here. We've been talking and engaged in the digital divide, such a regional, nationally important topic. And I wanted to kind of get the head of SANDAG's mobility and I'm going to say innovation, because really that's what you're doing. You're innovating, you're leading, you're pioneering something that is of national importance. So I wanted to have you here and explain a little bit about first your background, how you ended up in this role, and then take us through the Digital Divide Task Force that SANDAG is shepherding and all the different stakeholders. And in full disclosure, I'm one of those stakeholders. And take us through that process. But first, tell us about you.
All right. Well, thank you, Shahryar. Yeah, Antoinette Meyer. I'm the Director of Mobility and Innovation for the San Diego Association of Governments. And SANDAG's what's called a Metropolitan Planning Organization and a regional transportation planning agency for the San Diego region. So that's the county of San Diego and 18 cities. And we're governed by a board of directors made up of elected officials from each of those regions. And our primary responsibility is really developing the region's long-range transportation plan, but we also build and design major transportation projects in the region. So my role at SANDAG is around planning for the future of transportation, new mobility services, ensuring that we are thinking about technology and all of the trends in technology and how that impacts transportation and accounting for that in our plans and our projects. So I oversee a group that's working on what's called intelligent transportation systems. So building out digital infrastructure that will allow us to manage our transportation system more effectively and really help us to be prepared for connected and autonomous vehicles, which seem like they're way far out there. But you know, depending on the projections that you look at, could be, you know, a decade away. So, but I also oversee clean transportation and transitioning to zero emission vehicles. We have some really aggressive state policies in California, and we're expected to be all electric.
Oh, you know, we have a special guest just entering the room. So let me welcome the head of SANDAG, Hasan Ikhrata. Hang on one second. He is, I think he's coming on board, but we can keep going.
He's fashionably late.
Oh, well, that's okay. He has had a long day. Hasan, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Let me put my camera on here.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, there he is.
How are you?
Well, good, good. Welcome. We're recording, and we were just hearing from Antoinette, but now that you're here, and thank you so much for making time. I know you're not even in the office, but we were just talking about obviously the value of the digital divide and the questions I had saved up for you. So I'm not gonna put you on the spot because you're very good at it anyway. So I'm not gonna win that argument. But I did want to know how did this become a priority for SANDAG? Most people think of SANDAG as a transportation planning agency, as you are. How does the digital divide even become a priority for a transportation agency?
Well, first of all, it's really nice meeting you. The best way to call you is Shahryar or
Shahryar.
Shahryar.
There you go.
Nice meeting you, and thank you for having me, Antoinette. So it's a long story, but I'll make it really short. You know, when the pandemic hit about 18 months ago, I mean, as I tell my team, it really tested us as humans to the limit. This not knowing what to do, not knowing how to perform work, not knowing how risky life for our health, and so we mobilized quickly as an entity of mid-sized agency of almost 500 people, and start working. But we also giving who we are. SANDAG, or San Diego Association of Government, is the only regional entity in town that actually have all the cities and the county as members. No other agency could claim reach. And so people were hungry for information when the pandemic hit, and everybody was saying, what's the other side of COVID looks like? And we went to work. Our chief economist, Ray Major, did an amazing work on analyzing economic data for our communities. while we knew before that there exists a digital divide between the have and the have-not, we really never seen actual data. And especially when schools start going offline and knowing that our kids, our future, are learning through a modem that we didn't think is available to many of them. As a matter of fact, some statistics will surprise us. 30 to 40% of students in the San Diego system didn't have access to a decent internet to learn. And that really prompted us to think, okay, wait a minute, we're an agency of $1.3 billion budget. We have the reach we do, we need to do something. And then I am so lucky to have Antoinette. She always brings crazy ideas and I go for it and it ends up being, and I mean that, I really mean that. She came up with a crazy idea. We had a bigger Southern California group statewide led by former Secretary of Transportation, Sonny McPeak. And frankly, you probably talked to her.
I did.
When Antoinette brought that idea and she started attending the group, we're the first in the state to do a pilot on Digit Once policy. And so Antoinette and her team mobilized and actually we start talking to our private sector partners and our state partners. And obviously, no surprise, there were a hunger for doing something because and luckily the governor followed suit in his budget where he put a lot of money for broadband. Right. And now I believe we're cutting edge in the state to actually do what we should have done a long time ago and remember that access to broadband is access to opportunities and social justice and social equity. So that's what got us into that. But I would say that Antoinette and her team is really the one who got me really excited about the potential.
So she's to blame if this doesn't go right. Yes. But I think it is going right.
You know how that goes, right?
But it is going so right as just a former public servant, 25 years with the city and Port of San Diego. You know, I've observed how your staff does things and it's top notch and it's top class. And those crazy ideas in government is what we need to affect change. Because if everyone just follows the footsteps of the guy in front of them, you'll never get anywhere. So you got to find a new path and you got to have the vision to see what's coming. And I think if COVID wasn't here, as you said, we may have not noticed the great divide in our communities. And you could live in a beautiful region like San Diego and never realize the giant socioeconomic gap which exists not only physically, but as we have discovered with the statistics that your team has uncovered digitally and through broadband access. So none of us, I think we're all getting surprised as we're watching this fact-finding mission unfold. So I think you answered my question. You know, SANDAG is leading in this conversation. You're conferring with your other colleagues across the state and maybe becoming a model for what others. Is that how you see SANDAG's role eventually in 2022?
I think SANDAG is needed. Yeah. Yes, I think SANDAG, like you mentioned, I believe this whole innovation, future mobility that Antoinette is leading, she is, and the technology, while we're not there yet, we have a lot of work to do, but I believe SANDAG is on cutting edge when it comes to public entities like ours. So I think SANDAG will lead. Here is something, and I think you alluded to yourself. Sometimes necessity makes you do things that otherwise will take a long time to do. And in this case, I would say necessity made us move that way, but we were moving that way anyway, but it would have taken us longer time to get here. Here's my hope. And I mean, you know San Diego probably more than I do, for sure.
I doubt it, but
I've been in San Diego for, I would hope that our leadership does not get stopped or discouraged by either the cost or the amount of time we need to spend to do this right. I mean, everyone, if you ask anyone in San Diego, they'll tell you social justice and social equity is important.
Right.
And if you tell them, okay, are you willing to pay to make it really, at the top of the agenda, then you won't have everyone say that. Right. Our civic leadership has a responsibility right now that I hope first of all, it will allow SANDAG to lead. And I don't know whether you've seen some of the discussion at our board today.
I did.
Yeah, so this board, just so you know, in my tenure at SANDAG, took one decision that's unanimous, and that is to vote on the...
Wow.
Really?
That's impressive, because knowing San Diego as I do, it rarely happens.
Exactly. So Antoinette can claim that she's the only director who wrote a unanimous decision. So, and I think people like Secretary McPeak helped her credibility. Right. She spoke openly the first time and today. So I would say, yes, we want not only want to be a cutting edge, I think we must be a cutting edge, because like you said, rightly so, nobody thinks that San Diego with its beautiful beaches have the kind of poverty and low income and digital divide that do. But we do. We have data to show that we do.
Right. Well, thank you, Hasan. You've answered all my questions. I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate your service to San Diego.
Thank you.
Because as I was just telling Antoinette, SANDAG sits at a very unique position, as you said, with all these cities, mayors, council members being on your board makes your job very difficult. But as you said, civic leadership has stepped up and unanimously kind of supported your mission and direction. So we're on the right path. And I only expect great things to come for SANDAG next year. So I'm not going to keep you much longer, Hasan, but I really thank you for your time.
Thank you. You're in a hurry to get the real story from the real people.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you, Hasan.
Nice meeting you.
Likewise. Bye-bye. So, Antoinette, there we go. So we learned a little about your background, how you got here. Now take us through the task force and who's on it and what you hope to achieve in the coming months, years.
Yeah, so as Hasan mentioned, last January, we brought a resolution to the board asking them to commit to working together to close the digital divide and to give us permission to develop this digital equity strategy and action plan. And we thought it was going to be more challenging, I think, than it was to get them to buy into it. You know, some of the questions we had heard leading up to that was, well, it's important, but is SANDAG really the right agency to be working on this? What does it have to do with transportation? And like Hasan said, it has a lot to do with transportation. The future of transportation is all about technology. We're not going to keep building out roads, right? We have to manage what we have, and we can do that with technology. And you think about, what's happened over the last 10, 15 years with how much we rely on our smartphone for transportation, navigation, app-enabled services that we use, the bikes, the scooters, Ubers, and Lyfts. That's only going to continue to grow. So we had to make that case that it was related to transportation, but also that, as a regional agency, we in a council of governments, we are best positioned to bring everyone together, and you can't have everybody doing their own thing around the digital divide, or it's just not going to be super effective. So the board approved the resolution, and we immediately got to work, formed a multidisciplinary task force. It's a huge task force now. There's been so much interest in participating.
Every time I log on, it's like a bunch of more people on it, so it's growing.
I know, it's like every other week we get a request, can I join your task force? And it's like, sure, the more the merrier, we need everybody here to help roll up their sleeves to make this happen. But, it started off with like 30 or 40 organizations that were really representative of the different types of organizations working on this issue. Nonprofits, ISPs, government agencies, public health, public education. We worked together to develop a vision and goals, and then focus most of our time on what we called a gap analysis, really trying to understand the issue. We had absolutely no idea how hard it was going to be, Shahryar, to find accurate and reliable data. ISPs do provide the data that they're required to by the law, but unfortunately, it's just not at a level that we need to be able to do the planning work that we wanted to do. So it took us just many more months, and we had to cobble together, a variety of different data sources. And, it doesn't tell us everything that we need to know.
Yeah.
But it definitely helped us to understand where the big gaps are.
Right. So on the gap, but let me have you continue on in a minute. But first, define what you found out is the digital divide. When we say it, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, the digital divide covers both access to internet and adoption of internet. So on the access side is the service there? Is it available? Right. Is it affordable? And then on the adoption side, do people have the tools to be able to access the internet? Do they have the skills to be able to do it? Is the content accessible to people with different abilities? And so, we're not just talking about internet with the digital divide, we're also talking about devices and education, right? Sure. So, our analysis was really trying to cover all of that. Right. And
I'm sorry, and when we say access, we also mean high speed access, because I remember a lot of discussion about, you might have access to the internet, but if it's so slow and useless, as I think Hasan alluded to, modems with what we remember that phone noise practically.
Yeah, the dial-up.
That's gone, right? but you still have some ridiculously slow areas in our community that are just might as well be inaccessible, might as well be no internet.
Yeah, I mean, the federal government's threshold, and I think that's going to change. There's a lot of talk about it changing, is 25.3, and during the pandemic, I think 25.3 just really wasn't adequate. And given how many connected devices that we have in our homes now, so many different people doing high bandwidth activities at home, from school to work to games and watching shows, that's really obsolete. Our state has upped the ante and said 120 is kind of the new baseline in our state, but honestly, at the rate things are moving, that will probably be obsolete before you know it. But certainly is better than 25.3 and should be able to allow households to do the things that they need to do today. Right.
So you're discovering all these gaps, you're filling in the blanks, whatever you were able to get from the companies and others. You had to get a consultant to kind of do some analysis. This stuff hasn't been done before, right? There wasn't a playbook or anything you could cut and paste.
No, there was no playbook. I mean, I think some cities have done, master plans. I think most of them are either very much focused on broadband, and they're not looking at the full spectrum of digital equity. But there was no playbook. We actually didn't have a consultant. We did everything in-house for this project. So all of the great GIS work and the analysis was
pretty cool.
Our brilliant team.
So is there anything you want to show off? Is there any mapping, just as an example? I think
because it was so hard and so much work for us to collect all of this data, we wanted to make it available, the data that we have for our region anyway, we wanted to make it available to our communities. And so we created a digital divide, what we call Storymap, that's available on our website. And I can share that with you.
Sure. And that's sandag.org?
Yeah, sandag.org / digital equity, I think is where you find it. Let's see here. Are you able to see that?
Yep. Looks.
All right. Yeah. So we really just start out with an introduction that answers some of your questions. What is the digital divide? What is broadband? I mean, I don't think most people understand the infrastructure required to bring broadband to homes and to businesses. And we talk about the new speed threshold that the state identified. But then we go into the data. And I think, what you're seeing here in this map is in the green. These are the communities in San Diego County. And I'll scroll out so you get the whole county there. But those are the communities in San Diego County that have access to fixed broadband that meets that federal threshold of 25.3. So you see that, our urbanized areas in the region, the western portion of the region are fairly well served, but the yellow there, those are our tribes. Our tribes are really disconnected. And we have a lot of small unincorporated communities in the eastern portion of the county. and they do not have access to fixed broadband, or if they do, it doesn't meet even the speeds that the federal government
You
has set.
mentioned an important point. Do you feel the fact that some of these areas are unincorporated has led to the gaps?
I think so. I mean, I think there's not enough population,
right,
for companies to invest in these
right,
communities. So, some of the tribes, for example, we're working with Verona right now to try to get them connected to a project that we're implementing along SR 67 to add fiber. And they've got a reservation that's just a few miles off of that corridor, and it's 200 to 300 homes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a hard sell for an ISP without some kind of subsidy and support and help. So that's a role we see ourselves playing.
So as I'm looking at this map, I'm kind of playing it out on any town in America.
Yeah.
And certainly, as you said, urban cores seem to get where there's a lot of dense population. Naturally, infrastructure follows, right? Yep. Especially private infrastructure, whereas water and sewer, tax dollars, there's a system for that, and cities do that, and a little different. In fact, those things go in before anybody moves in, whereas some of these utilities telecom goes after when there's density, and then it justifies, as you said, the cost benefit. But some of these also are geographic. These look like mountain regions or hillsides. Right?
Yeah, it makes it even more difficult and expensive. But one of the opportunities we see to be able to help the private sector is, we do roadway projects in these communities. We do other public utility projects in these communities. Why can't we partner to help give you access to trenches or traffic control, which is extremely expensive when we're out there doing that kind of work? And so that's one of the opportunities we see.
Right. And the other similarity between this and any town in America might be the Native American properties and reservations. So this looks like this in San Diego, but it could look like this in Oklahoma, maybe a little different pattern with the yellow and green. But there's going to be these physical gaps, and then there's going to be some jurisdictional gaps, whereas sovereign lands are, at play. That explains what you're getting, right? Or the lack of access, right? Okay, got
it. This just shows that in large parts of the region, we only have, one provider available. So there's not a lot of choice. And when there's not a lot of choice, that means that costs can be exceptionally high.
Right.
So that's something that we found is in areas of the region that are lower income. So you're looking in this map here, the darker orange colors are areas where we have higher percentages of low income households that don't have an internet subscription at home. So even in some urban areas where you saw we have internet available, people can't afford the service that's available to them. And it's particularly out here in our rural areas, which is no surprise, people don't have internet at home. But in these urban areas, these here in the southern portion of the region, these are also the communities that have the highest minority populations, the highest unemployment rates. They were hit the hardest by the pandemic.
It just gives you, I think when you look at this, you begin to see what Hasan was talking about, that, you didn't know there was this gap until the pandemic hit, cascading all these difficulties in our most vulnerable, perhaps most disenfranchised communities, making things even worse.
Yep. That's exactly the case.
Right.
And another population that does not often have broadband at home is seniors. This could be affordability, but it could also be, again, we were talking about digital literacy, comfort with being able to use technology. So, large communities where the senior population is disconnected. So that's the other side of the equation. Bringing more education and helping seniors to use technology to be able to improve their lives, get comfortable.
And again, because of the pandemic, a lot of seniors relegated to stay at home for their own safety. Now Zooming and FaceTiming with their grandkids somewhere, and taxing their limited system even more than they were prepared to do.
Well, in health, I mean, you think about
Right.
most of us were doing appointments with our doctors online,
Right.
and seniors generally tend to have more, healthcare needs.
Right.
So it's really important, more important than ever. And as seniors are at a point where they're not able to drive, they have a real opportunity to benefit from
Right.
rideshare, ride-hailing services, but need to
Right.
have a smartphone, need to have Wi-Fi to be able to use those services, or to have groceries delivered,
Yep.
things like that. So
all
there's
the
a lot
things
of
we take for granted.
Exactly.
I think our senior community in any town, like I said, any town USA, is faced with the same thing. We just happen to do this analysis, but this is really applicable to any town that has seniors,
Yeah.
which is every town in America. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we also, we don't have a map to show it, but one of the members of our task force is a disability advocate,
Right.
and she's blind, and she represents low vision community. Really, she represents people with disabilities of all types. But another aspect that people don't often think about with the digital divide is having accessible content,
Right.
and for people with disabilities to have the software that they need to actually be able to get online and to be able to use the internet. And so that's another area that we address in our strategy. And I think it's an area that's often overlooked.
Right. Actually, I'll send you this link offline, but I'm aware of a certain telecom that's working on disability innovation.
Oh, that's good. I'm happy to hear that. Please do.
Yeah, I will. And it has to do with helping startups develop technology to help people with disability. That includes obviously all the array of disabilities, from mental to physical. But I will send you that. Yeah.
Yeah, we need to make those tools affordable. So one
Right.
of the things we learned from Charlene, who's on our task force, is there are a lot of tools out there, but there's a lot of low income people with disabilities that don't have the resources to acquire, what they need, the tools that they need. So, and you heard Hasan mention our chief economist, Ray Major, and the analysis he was doing during COVID to see which communities were hardest hit. And you'll see again that the same communities that tend to not have internet or computer at home are the same communities that have the highest unemployment rates here. And that's what this map is.
Wow.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about, infrastructure and expanding fiber infrastructure. This map shows where the fiber exists in San Diego County. No surprise, the same areas that have fixed broadband for the most part. But we also, public agencies, have fiber that we use for transportation purposes or for other facilities. And we can do a better job of leveraging that infrastructure to increase competition and bring better service to communities. So that's part of our strategy as well. And that's what you're looking at in this map. Is both the blue is the private sector fiber, and the colored lines are what we refer to as our transportation fiber ring.
Right.
But we have a lot of extra capacity there that's not being used, and that could be shared.
Right. Wow. Very telling. Very telling.
So that leads us to the strategy, which is, I think it's a really accessible document. We tried to tell a good story and make it an easy and enjoyable read. So I encourage your listeners to check it out. But really, there's 7 overarching strategies that we've developed to address both that access and adoption side. And we'll be turning this into an action plan that we'll take to our board in December. And then we roll up our sleeves and start implementing.
Can you touch on the 7 action plans? Just, you don't have to go into detail, but what are each of the 7?
Yeah, so, a key thing is really building consensus and raising awareness about the fact that broadband is no longer just an amenity or a nice to have, but it's a must have. It's an essential public service. And while we get that, there's a lot of leaders that still don't necessarily make that connection. So we think it's really critical that we really build that consensus in our region and across the state, that broadband should be treated like any other public utility or public service. We need to plan for it. We need to invest in it. We need to develop supportive policies around it. So that's a key strategy for us. We also really need to make sure that broadband is incorporated into our transportation plans. That's a huge opportunity
of course,
for us to, yeah, but it's not like a logical thing for transportation planners, you know, so.
No, that's why we've been talking. I mean, and the five big moves, you know, how do you plan for the next 50 years? And you can't do it without a communication system in your physical concrete asphalt streets, right?
Right. One of the things we've been doing, we've been sitting down with the county and with Caltrans and with our public utility here, San Diego Gas and Electric, just to look at where all of our right-of-way projects are, where we're going to be trenching, where we're going to be doing work over the next 5 years, so that we can actually plan ahead to get the fiber incorporated into those projects, and to try to find providers that want to partner with us on those projects. So that's what I mean when I'm saying incorporating into regional plans and local plans, is we really need to do this proactively. And we can't say at the last minute, oh, hey, you know, Cox or Verizon or whoever, we're going to have a trench next week. Do you want to come put some fiber in and expand your service? Well, that's just not how it works.
That's going to be tough. Yeah.
So our state has decided to build out this open access middle mile network. Recent legislation and a budget trailer bill are putting forward a lot of resources towards this. So, you know, we want to support that in our region. So that's the third strategy, is really driving the expansion of that open access middle mile fiber network through our projects.
Right.
We want to be good partners. We want to build trust and work with the broadband providers to connect to that middle mile network in those hard to reach and difficult to serve areas. So we've been, you know, including ISPs on our digital divide task force. We're going to be putting out a request for partners shortly to try to pre-qualify ISPs as partners on these projects. But it's the public-private partnerships are really critical and essential. We may not agree on everything, but ultimately, I think, you know, we'll figure out a way to work together to address the needs.
Right.
We also need to build up capacity with those community-based organizations and the public organizations that are working on digital literacy and getting the devices out there. So that's been a part of the task force, is bringing all of those groups together. You know, we found that there was a lot of work happening around our region, but it wasn't very well coordinated. Sometimes, you know, organizations were doing great things and competing with each other instead of collaborating, but just not knowing, you know, that they were competing. So we want to help to facilitate and be that forum, but we also want to help bring resources to those organizations so that they can do more.
Right.
The next strategy is around the data. So, you know, we were able to get some decent data, but we still need better data. We hope through those public-private partnerships we can get there. I know recent legislation at the state level is also going to be requiring that ISP share a bit more. But, you know, in order to get down to that kind of household service level planning work, we're going to have to get a bit more information.
Right.
Yep. And then, you know, last but not least is funding. So it's going to be critical that we have sustainable funding. There's going to be a lot of money coming into the state and the region here shortly, but you know, once that money's gone, we have to figure out how we sustain these initiatives and keep everyone connected.
So yeah, thank you for mentioning the funding, because what is it, 69 billion from the broadband.
The infrastructure bill.
From the federal government, kind of raining down across the country. Everybody, every state, every region is trying to figure out how much can they get, what can they use it for, and how to parcel it out to all the communities and cities and prioritize and all that stuff. So that's happening as we speak.
It is.
Right? It's unfolding as we speak. The question is, what happens after that money's gone?
Right.
And we make a dent in the digital divide, but we don't solve it. We don't fix it. We make a dent in it because it's such a national priority, right? You know, as you're talking, especially about the role definitions and working with different partners, makes me think of the food bank and some of the work I do with the food bank. I didn't know this, but they work with 500 food pantries.
Wow.
Right. So in the San Diego region alone, so every food bank, every major across the country probably has some kind of relationship like that, where they act like the Costco wholesaler. They get big funding and they grants and they get food, and then they give it out to the pantries to distribute to the community. So
Yep.
there's a need, a regional need that has been identified, which is food insecurity. Of course, just like the digital divide, gotten worse with the pandemic. And here I am looking at SANDAG and obviously a regional need of the digital divide. And you're trying to identify how do we work with all these stakeholders, partners,
Yeah.
to redistribute the assets and the funding and the resources and the opportunities. So you don't have to do it, and you can't do everything. You
That's
have
right.
to leverage every single relationship you know to make this work, and most importantly, to make it sustainable
Exactly.
for a lifetime, not just the next time. Because it sounds like this, some of it is pain management. It sounds like we can't fix it, we can't cure it, but we're gonna have to manage this pain because right now we're not addressing it at all,
Yep.
as far as I can see. So we're creating this regional momentum to try to address it, and then how to institutionalize these practices, these fundings, these partnerships, so it survives us.
That's right. And it depends so much on what happens at the federal level,
Right.
what direction the FCC is going to go, what
Right.
happens at the state level. You have so many different state organizations that are involved in some aspect of this beyond just the California Public Utilities Commission. You have the California Department of Technology. Now you have CENIC, which is a nonprofit statewide organization who's been designated as sort of the administrator of the open access middle mile network. You've got Caltrans, who's developing the Dig Once strategy and going to be deploying a lot of this technology. So there's just so many cooks in the kitchen, Shahryar, at every level of government.
Well, I mean, that's government, right? That's how we like to do things. But
we need to move quick, and government's not, well known for that.
No.
So.
Well, I think that's why the more we talk about it, the more we try to help people get smart on it, the more I think people realize the impact that it has in their daily lives, the disproportionate impact that it has on our most marginalized and socioeconomic challenged communities. The more we're able to kind of try to turn the wheel, and try to move it in the right direction. Well, it can't happen without people like you with those crazy ideas that Hasan mentioned. I'm so happy and I think just honored that he took the time to share his vision with us, which really just shows his humility and his compassion for the community that he's serving. And I think that's really good in leaders and public servants. That's what you want to instill in the next generation. Don't think you're just in charge of something. You are serving the community. And his compassion, especially during COVID, was very, I think, heartwarming. And I'm very happy that he made a guest appearance on our program. So, Antoinette, I'm so thankful for your time, for your leadership, for your ideas, for your energy. Don't give up. I'm right behind you. I'm gonna try to get as much attention to this as I can because I think it's the cause of our generation. Really, I mean, there's so many different causes you could get involved in, but given how much we rely on technology for our life, I mean, if somebody gets, lights go out. When the power went out just a few days ago in my house, first thing you reach for is your phone.
Yeah.
So it is an essential, I think, human right to be able to have access to the best there is. And you just can't live in a town like San Diego, America's finest city, and not, and kind of think that everybody had the same thing you do, because you don't. People don't. So, Antoinette, so thankful. We're going to keep in touch, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Shahryar. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
You too.